It started with a hesitation. Lena was late for work, hurrying along the sidewalk as the morning sun stretched her shadow long and thin across the pavement. She stepped around a puddle and her shadow didn't. It paused at the edge, rippling like a cloth caught on a nail, then slid forward a heartbeat later to catch up. Lena stopped. The shadow stopped too, but not in the exact same shape. It looked reluctant. She laughed it off and kept walking. Everyone knows shadows do strange things when the light hits wrong. Then it happened again. At a crosswalk, she shifted her weight, and her shadow leaned the other way as if bracing. When the light changed, her feet moved forward, and the dark shape under her hesitated, tugging back like a hand refusing to let go. For a 6 seconds, she felt lighter than she should have, as if part of her had stayed behind. That night, the reports began. A runner's shadow slipped off the path and vanished into the trees, leaving him stumbling as though he'd lost balance in a way bones couldn't explain. A woman in a subway watched her shadow stretch up the wall and curl into a corner while she stood still, her stomach turning with a sudden, inexplicable loneliness. Security cameras caught it all, and that was what broke denial. The shadows weren't glitching, they were choosing. The world tried to explain it with physics, light refraction, heat haze, viral edits. But the footage didn't lie. Shadows moved against their owner's intentions, sometimes subtly, sometimes with terrifying clarity. Separating, twisting, pointing toward things no one wanted to look at. Then came the first act of mercy. A man crossed the street while texting. A truck sped toward him, horn blaring. Witnesses saw his shadow leap forward like a living thing and jerk sideways, dragging him out of the lane. The man fell hard but alive, staring at the black shape beneath him as if it had grabbed him by the ankle. When he stood shaking, his shadow stayed close, almost protective. People began to notice patterns. Shadows behaved differently around certain emotions. Anger made them sharper, restless. Fear made them cling. Grief made them stretch, as if searching for something lost. And lies made shadows misbehave the most. When someone said words they didn't mean, their shadow would distort, pulling away like it couldn't stand to be attached to the false version of them. Within weeks, society reorganized itself around the dark. Buildings installed lights at multiple angles to pin shadows in place. Fashion shifted toward bright fabrics and reflective accessories, anything that reduced contrast. Some cities mandated shadow checks in sensitive jobs, judges, surgeons, pilots, because people had learned a simple truth. If your shadow refused to follow you, it meant something in you wasn't aligned. There were new crimes too. Some learned to weaponize it. They lured victims into alleys with carefully placed lights, hoping to confuse the shadows and make them detach. Black markets offered shadow tethers, straps and devices that promised control. Others tried to steal shadows outright, trapping them in dark rooms lit with a single bulb, like butterflies pinned to a board. The captured shadows didn't struggle. They simply stopped. And the people they belonged to grew pale and hollow, as if something essential had been unplugged. Scientists called it autonomous projection, but the name didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling people couldn't shake. The shadows had always been there, always attached, always silent. And now they were acting like they had opinions. Lena noticed hers changing gradually, the way a friend changes when you finally start listening. It began to lead her around puddles even when she didn't bother. It lingered near strangers whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. It stretched toward locked doors and flickered there, warning. Once in an elevator, she felt sudden irritation toward a colleague, and her shadow split at the edges, bristling. The colleague glanced down and took a small step back. Lena swallowed the remark she'd been about to make. The air eased, her shadow softened. The first time Lena tried to speak to it, she did it without thinking. She was standing in her kitchen late at night, light from the fridge spilling across the floor. Her shadow lay long on the tiles and she whispered, "What do you want?" The shadow didn't answer with words. It moved slowly toward the corner where she'd stacked unopened mail, overdue notices, the letter she hadn't had the courage to read from the hospital. It pointed like a finger. Lena's throat tightened. She understood then. The shadow wasn't a stranger, it was a part of her that refused to pretend. A Across the world, people were learning the same lesson. Shadows drifted toward buried memories. They leaned away from toxic rooms, they clung to children and pulled them back from ledges. They gathered in crowds as dark patches on the ground, pooling beneath speeches that rang false. Some nights, streetlights revealed thousands of shadows moving a fraction out of sync, as if the planet itself was full of quiet dissent. And then, one evening, the power went out in Lena's neighborhood. The city fell into darkness. No screens, no street lamps, no glowing windows, just moonlight, thin and honest. For the first time in weeks, Lena couldn't see her shadow at all. She expected relief. Instead, she felt exposed, like standing without a spine. She realized how much she'd come to rely on it, not as a servant, but as a compass. When the lights finally returned, her shadow reappeared on the floor, perfectly still. It didn't tug or point, it simply waited. Lena exhaled and sat down beside it, letting the dark share her shape. Maybe the world had always been made of two halves, what people chose to show and what followed them anyway. Now the second half had finally found the courage to move, and if shadows had their own will, then perhaps they had always had one purpose: to remind you, quietly and relentlessly, where you were lying to yourself, and to pull you, when it mattered most, back toward the truth.